You're listening to the Elvis Ultimate Fan Channel podcast, the channel that is devoted 100% to the life and career of the biggest selling recording artist of all time, with your host, Steve Francis.
Hello and welcome to another episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel. Eddie Fadal was a theatre owner, disc jockey, landlord and a sports writer for a local newspaper in Waco, Texas. His relationship with Elvis Presley began in 1956. He was a disc jockey at KRLD in Dallas, Texas, and Elvis was making the rounds. He had a lot of success in Texas, and Eddie met him at the radio station where he was promoting some records. Eddie liked his voice and thought he had great promise. Elvis performed concerts in Waco's Heart of Texas Coliseum during those years, and each time visited the Fadal home before and after his concerts. At Elvis's invitation, Eddie accompanied him on several tours during those days, but only as a trusted friend and travelling companion, never on the payroll. When Elvis was drafted into the United States Army in 1958 and was stationed at nearby Fort Hood, he would often get away to the Fadal home on weekends. Sometimes during that 6-month stint, he would unexpectedly show up in the middle of the week if he could get a day off from the base, along with friends who often accompanied him to Waco. I'm delighted to say that Eddie's daughter, Janice, joins me now on the line from Texas. Hi Janice, and welcome to this Elvis podcast.
Hi Steve, thanks for having me.
And how is the world with you over in Waco at the moment?
Well, it's hot and sunny here. It's not quite summer, but we've had a nice spring, but it's starting to warm up.
And how's the lockdown been for you? Because that's been sort of worldwide for everybody, hasn't it?
Well, it didn't change my life a whole lot. I'm kind of a hermit by nature, so as they say, I've been preparing for this my whole life.
Yeah, a bit like me. I've been keeping away from people for the last 57 years.
I hear you.
As I was saying before we started recording, we've had some good spells of hot, dry weather, which is quite unusual for Ireland. So we could get a lot of outside jobs done. We've done jobs that we never thought we'd do. We might get round to them in the next 3 or 4 years, and they're all done.
That's wonderful, isn't it great?
So every cloud has a silver lining.
Yeah, exactly. It always does.
So where would you like to start? As I said in the intro, your father, Eddie, knew Elvis. Well, you tell me when he first met Elvis, actually.
Well, I believe that Dad met Elvis in 1956 when he was working for KRLD radio. He was a disc jockey, and of course, those of you that know Elvis history know that that's when Elvis was really getting geared up and had some records out and was touring a lot in Texas. And the story goes that Elvis appeared at the radio station one day and met my father, and they became friends from then on. Dad played his records on the radio, and they just became, buddies after that.
And then I'm led to believe that he actually went out on a few concert tours with Elvis.
I think he did on the things that were close by. We live right in Central Texas, so if Elvis had played in Dallas, which he did, or Fort Worth, and I do have photographs of Dad with Elvis in Dallas, so it could have been that he was on one of those tours. So at that time. So I'm sure he did, but because he had a young family, he wouldn't go, any further than just something within 100 or 200 miles of home.
Well, actually, this afternoon I did a little bit of digging, and I think that your father went with Elvis to San Antonio, Houston, Galveston, Austin, Wichita Falls, and Fort Worth. And that would have been sort of January, February time, I believe. And then also Elvis came back in April to the Heart of Texas. Is it Heart of Texas Coliseum?
Yes, that's what it was called then. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he would have been with Elvis for a good 6 or 7 concerts.
I'd love to know where you saw that. I would love to read about that.
I was just Googling just generally Elvis in concert 1950s and things like that, and a website came up which was just called literally Elvis in Concert. and I clicked on that, and it gives you all the dates and matinee performances. It gives you, if he did 2 shows, it would say 2:30 and 7:30 and things like that. And I was just piecing it together, and from what we know about your father going on tour with Elvis, I just sort of thought, well, that's it. It would have been January, February time. It would have been those sort of dates. And then I also saw in April the Heart of Texas. So I thought, well, that's another one he probably would have went with him.
Yeah.
So yeah, just look that up. It's very easy. It's just Elvis in concert, and it lists them all out.
I will definitely do that. I actually think I've seen that before, so I'll have to check it out again. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, no problem. It's very interesting because there's another little thing you can do as well, where you can feed in a month and a year, and then it'll give you where he was, for that particular month and that year, and also it'll also tell you, it's very, very detailed. It'll also tell you what jumpsuits he was wearing and things like that.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah,
I will definitely check it out.
That's for the nerdy people like me, the Elvis fanatics.
Well, it's interesting because I've kind of come out and started telling my story. People come up to me and tell me stories, and I've read more books about Elvis than I've ever read in my life. And it's fascinating. His history is fascinating, and I love all the stories about him and his generosity and just, and then his quirky personality and all the things that made him so unique. I just love, so I'm turning into an Elvis nerd myself.
Yeah, I mean, 43 years after he's passed, and, we're still learning things today. I'm still learning, even after all these years, I'm still learning. That's what makes it so fascinating.
Absolutely. It really is. I agree.
So after 1956, what happened then? Did he kind of lose touch with Elvis for a little while, or?
I don't think so, because when Elvis was stationed in Fort Hood, when he was drafted by the Army, and they sent him to Fort Hood in Killeen, that's only about 50 miles from Waco. And so during that time, Elvis really missed his family. He moved his mom and dad and Minnie Mae, I believe, to Killeen to be closer to him at some point. But during that time, he was lonely. He missed the camaraderie of being around a family and in a family home. And so he would spend time at our home whenever he could get off the base, which was often enough for me to, as a little girl, recognize when Elvis was coming, because I would look out our window in the back of the house and there would be like black limousines lining up, by the house, and I would go running around telling, screaming at my parents, Elvis is here, So it was a common enough occurrence for me to react in a big, excited way. So
I'd imagine that Elvis never did anything too low key. There was always like a few limousines accompanying him.
Oh yeah. He always had friends with him, and Anita Wood came to our house on at least one occasion that I remember, and I think I remember that one so well because Daddy captured it on home movies. But I was fascinated with Anita. She was just like a little Barbie doll, and she looked like Marilyn Monroe. She was so beautiful and glamorous and sweet, So as a child, she was more of a role model to me, and Elvis was just kind of the guy that brought her there,
Yes.
that everybody big deal over.
Well, I've seen those movies on YouTube, and also I think you narrate them, don't you? And you're also interviewed during those. And we see many things. We see Elvis playing the piano. We see him eating. We see you waving at the camera.
Mm-hmm.
Are we cutie? Yeah. Are we cutie? You must have only been a couple of years old then, were you?
Well, in the very first video, you'll see me dancing. And during that time, that was when Elvis's first visit to our home in 56. So I'm really little. I'm just around 2 years old. So I don't really remember a lot about that. But in 1958, when he used to come, and when I'm waving at the camera, I'm a little bit older, and I remember that a lot better. I remember those times a lot better. And Dad would he'd get the camera out, the home movie camera, and everybody would just kind of sit still like it was, a regular photographic camera. He would have to say, hey, this is a moving picture. Everybody move. Everybody say something. So the reason I waved is because he said, hey, this is a moving picture. Do something. So I waved
Yes,
the
yes.
camera.
Then there's the famous shot where Elvis is eating pickles, and then
Yeah.
what does he do then? I've seen this many times. It always makes me smile.
I know it makes me smile looking back on it. Well, they were sweet pickles, let me say that, and they were cold. And he reached over and kind of pulled me towards him and gave me a little peck on the cheek. And a few seconds later, I really didn't like the feel of it because there was like this sticky pickle juice and, it felt cold. And so I kind of reached up my shoulder, I think, and wipe it off. So I say I'm probably the only girl who wiped off one of Elvis's kisses.
Definitely. We could put that in the book of records. The only girl that ever wiped a kiss off Elvis's kiss off. So he used to come out from the base every weekend when he could get away.
Well, sometimes he would come during the week, which was really a surprise.
Oh, right.
And in our home movies, you can see that he has a bandage on his little finger. And he had been out on maneuvers that morning and scratched his finger or did something to it and went to the, I don't know what they're called on base, but like the medic, I guess.
Yeah.
And said, oh, I hurt my finger. And so they wrapped it up and they said, well, you really can't go back out, so you've got the day off. And Elvis was ecstatic. He, hopped in his car, grabbed a bunch of buddies, grabbed Anita, and they all came to our house. And that was during the week sometime. And another time, I don't know if it was a weekend or weekday, and I'm not even sure if this was when he was in the Army, but he stopped by the house with his parents and Minnie Mae. They were on their way to Dallas and to see a movie, is my understanding. And they stopped in impromptu, as people used to do in those days. We don't do it so much anymore. But Mother, brewed up some iced tea, which we all drink around here, and served them. I think she might have even served them lunch. And then they went on their way to Dallas to the movie. So they even came to our home, which I think is really cool.
And did it leak out? Did fans find out that Elvis was visiting your home?
Oh, yeah, it was kind of hard to hide, when somebody pulls up to your house and there's 3 or 4 limousines parked.
That's true. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, and then word got out that they were friends. And so, people would come to the house. We had to take our phone out of the phone number out of the phone book so that people would stop calling. And even years later, people would find our old phone number somehow in an old phone book or something and call us and want to know if Elvis was there. And there was a time, too, when there were a bunch of kids that would get on the roof of the room that Daddy actually had closed in and added on. He had added on a little room, which later became Elvis's music room, and was painted in pink and black, which were Elvis's favorite colors at that time. So that area of the house had a flat roof on it, and it was only 1 story, so it was low enough for kids to hop up there. So they would get up there and, bang on the roof and try to get close to Elvis and, all kinds of things. It was a crazy time.
But Elvis was always very patient with his fans, wasn't he? Very indulgent of them. He wouldn't, he wouldn't get cross or lose his temper very, very much because, he knew that without his fans, he would still be driving a truck.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's such a great quality to have,
Oh, yes.
I wish the stars today felt the same way. I'm not sure that they all do, but anyway, yeah, sometimes kids would come. There was one particular story which I write about in our little book called Elvis Days, where Dad looks out our back door, and in those days we did not have air conditioning in the house, so there would just be a screen on the back door to keep out flies, and the door would always be open. So he looked out the screen door, and here come all these young teenage boys holding baseball bats.
Wow.
So that kind of scared my dad. He was afraid they were, maybe going to get violent or something. So, he immediately closed the door and he moved everybody out of that room and said, to Elvis, look, there's all these kids out here. I don't know what's going on, but just stay back here, and out of sight, and I will go outside and talk to them. So Dad went out there and talked to the boys. And it turns out they had been playing baseball nearby on a vacant lot or a little field that might have been there then. And they just saw Elvis's cars outside and wanted to come meet Elvis. So Dad went back inside and he goes, I can disperse these kids if you want me to. You just tell me what you want to do. They just want to meet you and get some autographs. And Elvis said, oh, no, I want to go talk to them. Mm. So he goes out there, and I don't know how long he's out there, but I do remember the tension in the home at first because we were scared. We were scared that some violence might come around, know.
Yeah. That it must have been a scary thing to see for your father to start with.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, we didn't, at that point, didn't know what was going to happen, but it turns out they were all peaceful. They were all fans. They just wanted to meet Elvis, and he, certainly went outside and spent a long time talking to them and signing autographs. I would love to know if there's any of those kids out there today that still have those. That would be fascinating to know.
Yes, I'm sure it's a day they would never forget as well.
Absolutely. How could you?
Tell me about the tree that's I think it's on the front lawn outside the house.
Yeah. When Elvis first visited, we were living in a little apartment behind my grandmother's house. And the second time he visited, we had moved into the larger home with my grandmother because she was getting older and needed someone around. And my father was the youngest of a large family of brothers and sisters. He was the baby. So we were the ones that were the closest to her. And so we moved into the big house with her. So that's where the pink and black music room was for Elvis. And so Elvis met my grandmother, and she was from Lebanon, spoke very little English. They had immigrated to Texas around the turn of the century. But she was charmed by him. She just thought he was wonderful. He would always kiss her on the cheek and treat her with a lot of respect. And so when she passed away, it was just a few months after Gladys had passed away. Mm-hmm. So Elvis, the Presley family, sent us a telegram, which I have copies of hanging at the house. And it, said, we're so sorry. Let me see if I can find it and read it to you. Sorry about the loss of your mother, and, to our family, that just happened to us too. And okay, it says, Dear Eddie and family, so sorry to hear about the loss of your dear mother, and you have our deepest heartfelt sympathy. If it were possible, we would be there with you in person. Since that is not possible, we want you to know that we share your grief. As you well know, not so long ago, we suffered the loss of a dear loved one, in which we are still suffering and miss her more and more each day, but only God can comfort us at a time like this. So, and then it continues, we are happy to say that we had the privilege of meeting and getting to know your mother, and she was great. May God bless the Fadal family until we see you again. Sincerely, the Presley family. So after all of that, getting to the tree, Dad decided to plant two, I believe they were both red oak trees in the front yard of the house. And he planted one on the left side and one on the right side. And he dedicated one to his mother and one to Gladys. So both the trees are still there. The one that was dedicated to his mother is not in the healthiest shape, but we have done some treatments to it to try to bring it back to life and have it, put out some new shoots and grow. But that's the story behind that.
That's a beautiful story, a beautiful gesture by Eddie as well, isn't it?
I think so.
Yes, yes. And what a great message from the Presley family to you on the death. They always seem to be a very caring family. They always considered other people's feelings. Elvis was brought up by Vernon and Gladys always to consider other people's feelings.
Yeah, and that's what I've found in my readings about him, is that he was just so considerate.
Yes, yeah, that's the word, considerate.
Yes, he really was. There's a funny story that I wanted to tell you about my mother.
Please do.
In the video of me dancing with Elvis in 1956, when I'm so little, there's just a small clip of that. It's kind of dark, in the room, but you can see what happened when I tell you the story. My mom, Linnell, was operating the movie camera, and she was like focusing on my feet or something, dancing, and then she goes up to Elvis's face, and he does his little grin, that kind of looks like a snarl.
Yes.
She didn't know Elvis. This was her first time meeting him, and she thought that he was being very cheeky, to use one of your words, and disrespectful in a way. So she pans down to his feet, and you can see that, and it kind of, it was a put down to Elvis. So after that, he was always she was never Linnell. She was always Mrs. Fadal. And he just, she felt like, or I guess he felt like she had kind of put him in his place in a way, because she didn't think he was being sincere when he smiled like that. So it was just kind of funny, the reaction my mom had. She was just a country girl, and she didn't like that expression on Elvis's face, and she let him know about it.
Talking of nicknames, he actually gave your brother, is it Dana or Dana, do you pronounce it?
We pronounce it Dana.
Dana,
he was
yes.
After a famous Texas football coach named Dana Bible. So that's where Dana got his name from. My dad was a big football fan. So.
But Elvis gave him another nickname, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He sure did. The day that we were filming the home movies that we've referenced a few times, Dana had gotten into a lower cabinet in the kitchen where Mom kept a box of light bulbs. And Dana, just, being a little toddler, just reached in there and grabbed one and comes walking into the living room where Elvis and Anita and all his buddies were sitting, and he's holding this light bulb in his hand by the base of the light bulb. And it just tickled Elvis. He just started laughing. He just thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. And so he nicknamed Dana Reddy Kilowatt. And Elvis fans, I think, probably know who Reddy Kilowatt was, but he was the kind of the logo for the electric company in the South, I think Mid-South Electric or something like that. And so he looks like a lightning bolt with a head, and I think his nose is a light bulb, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me see if I can find a picture real quick. So that's where the nickname Reddy Kilowatt came from.
And did it stick? Did he, do you still refer to him as Reddy Kilowatt?
Oh, no.
I'm pretty sure he's glad of that.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. It's so funny. I'm trying to find a little picture of him. I saw one earlier, but I don't see it now. Oh, yeah, here we go. Yes, he has a light bulb for a nose, and his body is all made out of lightning bolts. So that's where it came from.
Of course, these were happy times, but we have mentioned obviously Gladys's death. Do you remember Eddie saying anything about Gladys's death and how it affected Elvis?
Oh yeah, Dad talked about that quite often. As soon as I believe Elvis called our home that evening or the day that happened and asked my dad to come to Memphis with him. And Elvis was in Fort Hood at the time. And Dad couldn't leave right then. So the next morning, I think he flew there, which was kind of unusual for my dad. You know, back in those days, not everybody flew somewhere, but I believe that's what he did, and arrived, very shortly after that. And Elvis was, he was devastated. He was inconsolable, and Dad stayed there and helped Vernon, helped the family, plan the funeral and do all the necessary things. Just kind of took over and helped in any way that he could, help the family. And I'm not sure how long he stayed there when that happened, but he was there. And, he does talk about it and, describe Elvis's anguish and how he went to the casket and, spoke to his mom and held her hand and that sort of thing. So it was very sad.
Yeah, I've always thought it was a most devastating time for Elvis. He was probably never the same again after Gladys passed away. But that's probably not just universal. It's a universal thing. It's not just for somebody like Elvis. I don't think you're ever the same after you lose a parent. But Elvis was under a lot of stress at the time because he was going away to Germany. He had, the eyes of the world on him, just waiting for him to make a mistake and trip up. And, if that wasn't bad enough, he then had to face losing his mother. So it must have been an awful time for him.
Absolutely. I think it was. And even though we never recover from the loss of a parent, he and Gladys were unusually close. They had their own little language that they spoke, and our family even adopted it to some degree because we heard it, so often, and it would be like baby talk. And Elvis would say things like, "How her doing?" instead of "How are you doing?" How's her doing? This sort of thing. Where's her going? It's kind of hard to describe, but that was what our family adopted. And we would say it just like Elvis said it to each other, and that we would never say it in public because it wasn't correct English, or nobody would have.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
But,
no, I always think it does show how close somebody is when they can have their own sort of language that only those two can understand. It does show an extreme closeness.
Right, and he spoke with Anita that way, and he had a nickname for her. He called her Little because she was so tiny and had small hands and small feet and everything. And so we actually had a little pet that we got, a little dog that we bought after, Elvis had shipped off to Germany, I guess, and we called her Little after Elvis's nickname for Anita. So that name stuck around too.
Now there was a going away party, was there, at the house in Colleen just before Elvis shipped out?
Yes, there was. A lot of fan club members were there. My dad was there. Lamar was there. A lot of people were there with Elvis.
And they were. I've seen the pictures. Obviously, Elvis doesn't look too happy. He looks quite forlorn and sad. But you can understand why he felt like that. Shortly after losing his mother, having to go away to Germany, I'm pretty sure he was convinced that his career was finished.
Yes, he was, and he confided that to my dad. He was really afraid of that people would forget about him while he was over there and not putting out records or, doing anything like that. And that was a big concern for him. And, he was already, just like you say, he was already devastated after losing his mother, and then to go off and leave everything that he knew to go to a foreign country like Germany where, he couldn't speak the language. And, I'm sure it was overwhelming for him. Absolutely. And he was very sad the night he left. My dad said everybody at that house was crying, everybody was just overtaken. They just didn't want him to leave, and he, he was sad. So
I think Colonel Parker had a very strange approach to dealing with Elvis being away for 2 years, because he only allowed Elvis one recording session while he was on leave in June, and he recorded only a small handful of songs. You would have thought that, he would have tried to get him in there as long as he could in maybe 20, 25 songs, and that would last them for the 2 years. But I always thought that Colonel's idea was always leave them wanting more.
yeah, I believe that's right.
So that's probably why he did what he did. And Steve Scholes, the A&R man who was sort of like controlling, or not so much controlling, but he was responsible for Elvis's recording career, begged Colonel Parker for the recording session, and he just got one evening's recording session. So, but that's the. Did Eddie ever speak much about Colonel Parker? Do you remember ever meeting Colonel Parker? He must have visited Elvis in Killeen, did he?
I don't remember him from that time period, but in I believe it was 70, we took a little vacation and went to Vegas, and Elvis was playing Vegas at that time. And I can just remember seeing the Colonel and some of the entourage. I want to say maybe it was Red West. I'm just not sure who was with him at that time, and I could have cared less at that time. I was about to be a senior in high school, and to me, Elvis was old-fashioned, and I liked the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all those guys. So, I didn't pay much attention. I do remember seeing the Colonel, and Dad and Mom talked to them for a long time, and I just don't exactly know what happened at that point, because Dad really wanted to see Elvis and say hello, and the Colonel wouldn't let him, and I don't know why. There has been speculation of why, but I really have no idea why.
He wouldn't have been the only person that he ever stopped seeing Elvis. He didn't like anybody getting too close to Elvis. He liked to be in control the whole time. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether you know the story of Steve Binder, who did the 68 comeback special with Elvis, which was very, very successful. He twice tried to contact Elvis after the special, and he was unsuccessful both times. The first time, Elvis had given him his private direct number to ring, telephone number, and when he tried to ring, it wouldn't connect. And then I think the second time was when he was in Vegas in 1969, and he called backstage, and he wasn't allowed into the dressing room. And I don't think that Elvis knew that Steve was there, because I don't think that Elvis would have turned Steve away.
No, and I don't think he would have turned Daddy away either.
Exactly.
That's what's right about it. But, Dad did say that at one point, and this could have caused the Colonel to block, my father from seeing him, but Dad does recall that at one point, Elvis asked my dad if he would manage him, which, if that ever got back to the Colonel, I'm sure that would not have made him, and Dad, he had never done anything like that. Yes, he was a disc jockey. Yes, he was a theater owner. He knew a lot of people, and he was a good businessman. I think, Elvis was just distraught and wanted, people he could trust around him. And I'm not saying he didn't trust the Colonel. I'm just saying that, he kind of looked up to my dad, because Daddy was quite a bit older than Elvis. So, that could have been the reason. Who knows what the Colonel's motives were.
There's a rumor also that he turned Elvis against Scotty and Bill, who he started out with.
Oh, really?
So again, there's a case there where, Parker just didn't want anybody getting too close to Elvis.
Yeah, I can see that. Definitely.
It's unfortunate, because like you say, I don't think for 1 minute he would have turned Eddie away. after
Yeah.
after everything that Eddie had done for him
I know, and
prior to going into the army.
I wonder if Elvis ever, wondered why he didn't hear from certain people, and questioned that at all.
Yeah, I mean, the people asked over and over and over again why he didn't stand up more to the colonel. I
Hmm.
mean, on the occasions he did, it was a success. He stood up against him over the '68 comeback special.
Hmm.
He stood up against him for the 1969 Memphis sessions, Chips Moman's studio. Again, a big success. Every time he seemed to just go and think, well, I'm not listening to the colonel on this. I'm going to make my own decisions. It was a success,
Hmm.
but it never continued. He'd always fall back. I mean, you probably know the story of him actually firing the colonel, and the colonel said, "Right, if you want me to go, you're going to have to pay me what you owe me." And he sat up all night making up the figures about all the things that he advanced Elvis and all this and that. And when Vernon and Elvis saw the bill, they thought, well, we can't afford this.
Hmm.
So Elvis had to call the colonel and, well, apologize, I suppose, because they had some argument about a maitre d called Mario who was going to be fired, and Elvis went on a rant from the stage, saying that the Hiltons are terrible people and they're going to fire this fellow as soon as I leave, because it was the closing night or something like that. Anyway.
Wow.
And him and the colonel had a blazing row, and Elvis fired him, but it didn't last.
That is so crazy. I want to read about that. That's interesting. I have heard from, I don't know what to call him. He's an Elvis collector and Elvis dealer. He deals in a lot of Elvis memorabilia. But he has a lot of letters that the Colonel wrote to Elvis, and it actually shows that the Colonel, especially after Elvis died, was very generous with Priscilla and Graceland and everything. I know that's really contrary to everything that we've ever heard about the Colonel, but it kind of makes me wonder, you know. So anyway, I'm sure there's another story there to dig up. But
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes think uh, Colonel Parker was undoubtedly very good for Elvis, getting him his start, his contact. The contacts he had at RCA, the contacts he had in television, Milton Berle and Steve Allen and all those. But and then he undoubtedly did a good job keeping his name alive while he was away for 2 years. I mean, if you were away for 2 years now in this type of business, you're dead. You have to keep out there the whole time. So
mhm.
he did a great job keeping Elvis's name alive until he came back out in 1960. Then after the initial hullabaloo of Elvis coming back and doing GI Blues and a couple of other movies, I think actually he kind of ran out of ideas.
I agree. I think the way that he marketed Elvis was after the Army wasn't really. It wasn't keeping within the times of what people wanted to see, I think. Um, Especially as we approached the era of the Beatles, 1964 and all that. Elvis started to look like an old guy, like
Mm, mm.
he still, to me, to my age group. And I didn't really connect with any of his songs anymore at all until he came out with Burning Love. I think that's a song.
Yes.
The name of it, I'm not sure if that's the right name. And then the things that he did in that session that you just described, where, that was so successful that he did, these songs that were really current and exciting. And, that was Elvis. So I agree with you. I think the Colonel kind of did run out of ideas and just kept doing the same thing over and over.
Well, the movies became quite lucrative, especially when after about 63, 64, they were done over a space of only about 18 days. But the money was there. I mean, Elvis was getting $1 million a picture. They were getting so much of the profits as well. So, and then they had the soundtrack album to go with each movie. So it was a very lucrative thing to be doing. You know, why go to all why go to all the trouble of going on tour and all that, you know, and the traveling and all that, when you can just go into a studio, record a soundtrack album, do 18 days of filming, and you're done.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, who wouldn't want to do that? That's a cash cow, as they say.
But unfortunately, they became quite formulaic and silly from about 1963, 64 onwards. In fact, from 1963, after probably Viva Las Vegas with Anne Margaret, they just lost steam, really. They were just bits of fluff nearly, weren't they?
Yeah, I agree. I think you're exactly right. And that's why, you know, that's why people in my age group kind of lost interest. You know, it wasn't exciting and new anymore. It always broke my heart. And I only heard, you know, the story secondhand of Barbra Streisand wanting Elvis to co-star with her in the remake of A Star is Born.
Oh, yes.
And how Elvis really wanted to do that, and it just kills me that he did not get that opportunity. He would have been so great for that. So I think that's really sad, and I know the Colonel had a lot to do with making that deal fall apart. So that.
Well, one of the other saddest things I ever heard Elvis say was he knew that Hollywood was laughing at him. He actually said that, and they made him physically ill as well. He said that in a 1972 recording that he did for Elvis on tour. He says, you know, no money, no matter how much money they paid me, it couldn't have been enough to make up for how ill they were making me. So that's one of the saddest things as well.
Yeah, it is. It really, really, really is. He was such an artist, and he wanted to be taken seriously as an actor. And I remember, was it Flaming Star? I'm not sure what year that came out.
Flaming Star, yes. He filmed it in 1960. It was probably released in 1961.
Okay, well, at that time, my dad had a theater, and he showed that movie. And I remember, you know, he and Mother would keep up with Elvis, and they would say, oh my gosh, he's so excited about this role. I think it was a serious role that he played in that movie. I haven't seen it, I will admit, at least since it came out. No, I was pretty young. But they were so happy for him because they knew that's what he wanted, was to be taken seriously as an actor. So...
Well, people say he had the potential to be a good actor, but I say no, he was a good actor. When you see movies like King Creole, the one you've mentioned, Flaming Star, he had a great flair for comedy as well. If you ever watch the film Follow That Dream, a great comedic performance. So when people say he could have been a good actor, he was a good actor. He just didn't get the material, especially in the mid-60s. The material just wasn't there.
No, I agree. That's absolutely right. He was a natural. You know, I don't think there was anything that he really couldn't do. So it's just sad the way he was managed. I would have loved to have seen someone that had a little bit, you know, the Colonel was older. You know, he came from circus days. Things had changed by the time the 60s rolled around, you know, and I just think he couldn't see that bigger picture of what to do with Elvis.
No, it was the now money. I've always said it's the now money. If you can get the money quickly and run, that's what Parker wanted. He had no foresight. He didn't know how to let Elvis grow as an artist. He just wanted the money.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Right.
Okay, so if we can maybe... We're getting a little bit morose about things, but shall we talk about the Elvis house?
Yeah, sure.
You tell me about the Elvis house and what happens now.
Okay, well, the Elvis house is a home that was built by my Lebanese grandparents in 1924. And it was the home that my mom and dad and Dana and I moved into when our grandmother became older. And it's kind of a Mediterranean-style home. It's the home that Elvis came to visit the most because we were living in the house by 1958, 57, 58. And those were those Fort Hood days. So it was a great big, it still is a great big family home. And Dad had taken the little room that he had enclosed. It had been like a carport attached to the house. We call it a porte-cochere. And Dad had enclosed that a while back to make a little room so he could put his stereo in there, because Dad loved music. He loved to listen to it loud as he could. So he put a stereo in there, and then when Elvis came to visit and Dad found out that pink and black were his favorite colors, he painted the room in pink and black. So that became the Elvis room, you know.
Yeah.
And so the house still belongs to Dana. Dad wanted to keep it in the family, so he wanted Dana to have it and keep it in the Fadal name. So Dana had been using it as a rental property for many years, but just found that it was an expensive home to upkeep. It has a red tile roof. It has some foundation issues, things that, you know, cost a lot of money, and he couldn't really get enough rent for the house. So a few years ago, he was thinking of selling it. And so, you know, I was being supportive and thought, well, maybe it is time to sell the house. And then I thought about it for 2 or 3 more days, and then I called him up and said, you know, Dana, Waco is getting a lot of exposure from the HGTV show called Fixer Upper, which I'm not sure if you get it over there, but it's a Waco couple that fixes up older homes in Waco.
Yes.
And it's become very popular, and they've become big celebrities. And so at that time, I was hearing all this buzz, you know, about all the visitors coming to Waco and how everyone was opening up vacation rental homes. So I just floated that idea to Dana. I said, what if we do this? What if we try it out before you sell it and see if that will make it able for you to keep the house? So he said, well, I'll do it if you'll manage it. And I said, sure, I'll manage it. So we set it up as an Airbnb rental, and I went to thrift stores and estate sales and everything I could find to find mid-century style furniture to furnish part of the house in. And then I restored the little room back to its original pink and black colors, which I was able to match perfectly. I was so proud of myself. And then we put it's called a Sputnik light fixture over the dining room table.
Okay.
Kind of looks like, you know, a starburst or something. And those were very popular in the 60s. And we had one at one point in the house. I'm not sure if it was there when Elvis visited, but when I went to Graceland, I noticed that there's one hanging in the foyer at Graceland over to the side, like in front of Gladys's bedroom there. And so it was really fun to go into Graceland and see the influences that had passed back and forth, either from my dad to Elvis or vice versa. So I furnished the house as closely as I could to what it might have looked like, you know, in those days.
Okay, well, I tell you, will we go through the rooms? Because each room sort of has a theme, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Will we start with Eddie's living room?
Okay, the living room is where all the movies were made, the home movies. And I put the furniture in there to kind of replicate the arrangement of the room at that time. At that time, we did have a piano right in front on the wall that's right in front of the front door. And as I mentioned before, we didn't have air conditioning in the home at that time. So the front door and the back door were opened all the time so that air could flow through the house. And Elvis would sit at that piano. In fact, in the home movies, you can see him playing the piano and that the door behind him is open. And often people from the neighborhood would hear the music and they would come sit on the front lawn to try to hear, you know, Elvis singing. So that is that room. That's the living room.
And that's where the famous pickle kiss took place. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
The next room is the Janice room, named after you, obviously.
Yes, I kind of decorated that in more of my generation, so it's more of a 60s, 70s vibe in there. Each room has its own style. The Dana room, I did that in kind of a cowboy theme, not really because Dana was into cowboys, but because I found this fabulous bedroom set that was cowboy inspired, with the style of it from that era. So I put that in there. And then the Elvis bedroom, I found this magnificent looking headboard that's really big and decked out all in gold. And so I thought that just looked like the bling that Elvis would have liked. And I arranged that room in the way that it was arranged when Elvis visited. And that was the room where he would actually sleep or take a nap, or he and Anita would go in there and take a nap or
Yes.
whatever they did. And so when that door was closed, we just, didn't bother Elvis. So
Yeah.
that's how the rooms are all named.
There's obviously the dining room as well, the room where the family with Elvis, Vernon, Gladys, Minnie May, and Anita Wood gather to celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, and enjoy delicious home-cooked meals. Now, those meals were in Linnell's kitchen. That's actually named Linnell's kitchen, obviously after your late mother.
Yes. Yeah.
It's also Gladys would have used the kitchen as well with Linnell, would she?
Oh, yes. She actually taught Mother what some of Elvis's favorite dishes were and taught her how to cook them so that when Elvis came to visit, he would have a taste of home there. Elvis was very simple in his food tastes, as a lot of people know, the peanut butter and banana sandwich. He loved beans and black-eyed peas and cornbread and just, basic Southern food. And that's what my mother cooked a lot of, meatloaf, things like that. But when Elvis would bring his friends, they'd want steaks and things.
He liked burnt bacon as well, I
Yeah,
believe. Sliced tomatoes with purple whole peas, stuff like that, yeah.
right. That's exactly right.
Yes, people can actually book the house to stay.
Yes, they can. It's on Airbnb, and if you just put in Waco as your search and the Elvis house, you'll find it.
Well, the website is theelvishouse.com.
Correct.
Great. Okay, I'll put a link to that actually on the channel as well for people. They can just click on that. Just when was the last time that yourself or Eddie met or saw Elvis? Was it the 1970? No, he didn't get to see him in 1970.
He didn't get to see him then. I believe, I'm not really sure because, I had grown up and kind of moved away, moved out of the house. But I believe it was in 58 or 60 when the helicopter pictures were made of Elvis sitting in that helicopter. He was on leave. That might have been for Gladys's funeral. And Dad went up there and stayed during that. I'm thinking it was like 1960 or 61. Might have been the last time they actually saw each other.
I seem to have a recollection of reading somewhere that Eddie met him while he was filming Follow That Dream.
Yeah, I've seen that.
In 1961.
Yeah, okay. All right, I don't remember that, but we did visit California in 1960 and in 1961. And during one of those trips, Dad had Elvis's address for a home he lived in Brentwood, maybe. Trying to think. So anyway, we drove up to that house, and as well as I remember, it was a big two-story traditional-looking home, much, kind of like Graceland in a way. And Elvis's maid came out and talked to us. We were just all sitting in the car, and she said that Elvis wasn't there. He was filming. So I assume he was, maybe he might have been, or maybe he was in Palm Springs. I'm just not sure where he was. I was little. I wasn't really paying a lot of attention. But so it could have been that after that, Dad did go to Follow That Dream and spent the day on the set. I don't know. I don't remember that. And if he did, he went alone. And so that's why I wouldn't remember that.
So I suppose we can talk about Elvis's death now, and I'm pretty sure that Eddie traveled to the funeral, did he?
Sure, that was in 77, I believe.
77. Do you know, did Eddie ever tell you how he found out, or did somebody call him, or did he just see it on the news?
That's a good question. I was working. I was a hairstylist and I was at work that day, and we had the radio on all the time, and it was announced. So as soon as I heard it, I called home and said, "Does Daddy know that Elvis passed away?" And Mother said, "Yes, he's leaving right now." So I don't know if they heard it on the radio or if maybe someone called him to tell him. I'm just not sure of that. But I know that he left right away and was there during the whole time, that was going on. He helped Vernon. Vernon sort of said, "Eddie, you've been with us before in this situation. Just do what you think needs to be done." And at that time, Dad had become a sports writer for one of our local newspapers. And so he took it upon himself to manage the press as much as he could. And so he was at the front gates of Graceland, helping members of the press get their stories or interview people, just whatever anybody needed. He was at that front gate helping the whole time. And he did see Elvis in his coffin and described, that, he was wearing all white. I remember Dad talking about that and how sad it was, and all the people that streamed in to see Elvis, Aunt Margaret, just, different celebrities. Dad mentioned a bunch of them, that had come to pay their respects. And, Dad was just right there in the thick of it, doing whatever he could to help the family and the fans at the gate. If there were several emergencies, I believe, that, fans passed out from the heat, or they needed water, and they were distraught, and
Yes.
so Dad was handling all that. And I remember when he came home, he just told about the millions of flowers that were on the front lawn there at Graceland, how it's all you could see were flowers that people had brought. So, he was there with the family during that time, and I thought that was really special that he was able to get in and get there, and that Vernon was so happy to have his help, and, that whole thing. So
A very, very, very sad time. It's the first time, I mean, I'd experienced death prior to Elvis's death, but it was the first time a death had shocked me to the extent that it did. It was a true jaw-dropping moment. I can remember when I heard, and my jaw did actually just drop open. And I've heard members of the Memphis Mafia say, we never expected him to die. We knew we'd die, but we never thought Elvis would die. It was something about him. He just seemed immortal.
yeah, well, he's proven to be rather immortal.
Yeah.
He's such an icon.
And he thought people would forget about him when he was away in the army for 2 years.
I know. So sad. Yeah, everyone's kept his memory alive. He would have had his 85th birthday in January. So
Yes, that's right. And look at Graceland now. They have the big plaza across from it. They have the new guest house, which I understand is full most of the time, and very, very difficult to get in around Elvis Week, because that's obviously those are the two busiest times in Memphis, is January and August.
Exactly. And when Dana and I were actually there in January, and we had a tour of Graceland. It was Dana's first visit. It was my second one. And, we went out to the garden where Elvis was buried. And Dana, it was so interesting. He had the same reaction that I did. He just broke down and started crying.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt the first time. It was so sad to see Elvis's name, on a grave, and to realize how intertwined our families had been at one point in our family history and, our father. And it just kind of brought it all home to him like it did to me my first visit. And it was very moving. It's very moving to go there. And I will say, after that, we did go to all the museums there in the plaza, I guess it's called. And it was amazing how well and how much has been preserved of Elvis's history. And I'm so happy that they did that. I know a lot of fans that used to go to Memphis in the old days miss the old days, and I certainly understand that. I would miss that too. But the fact that the family has preserved everything in such a wonderful way and archived everything, and it's a real tribute to Elvis and his memory, and I think it's well deserved.
Yeah, I don't think Elvis liked to throw anything away, and I don't think Vernon did either. They were keepers. Once something came into their possession, they kept it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is as you say, yeah, a good thing. Thankfully, they did.
It was interesting. When I was there, I saw a phone bill from 56 or 58. I snapped a picture of it, and it was 2 or 3 long-distance calls to Waco. And I thought that was so cool. I thought, well, there you go.
Yes, yeah, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I always think, you can see copies of the invoices for the music gates, the building of the stone wall around Graceland, the white stone lions at the entrance to Graceland. You can see the receipt for that as well. It's fascinating, really, that all that sort of stuff was kept. I mean, most people would have thrown those away after a couple of years.
I know. It really is amazing. I think it was because they were so poor. And I think Vernon had a fear of losing everything, all the money that Elvis had made. And so I guess maybe that's why they held on to everything. I'm not sure, but anyway.
Yeah, poor Vernon was always convinced that they were going to go broke, especially when Elvis started spending a lot of money. Elvis would go through spending sprees. Like he when he bought the ranch, and then he bought the cabins, and he bought a truck for everybody and all those things. Poor Vernon nearly had a heart attack with seeing the bills coming in.
I imagine I would have too.
But Elvis was kind of very blasé about it. He'd just say, "Daddy, I'll just make another movie, or I'll just do another concert, and that'll pay for it."
Yeah.
So he was right in a way. A way. The money was always going to be there. There's a book as well, isn't there, called Elvis Days?
Yeah. It's a book.
You wrote that?
Well, actually, it's a lot of my dad's stories. He had published, when he worked as a writer at the newspaper that I mentioned earlier, he published a little small format type magazine where he wrote a lot of the stories about his relationship with Elvis, published his pictures. He had my mother write a story. He had some of his friends who met Elvis write stories about when they met Elvis. And so he had taken all these stories and published them in that paper, and I just wanted to make it a little more official. So I took those stories and some stories I had written and some recollections of some other people that had told me things and put them together in a little book called Elvis Days. So it's mostly Dad's writings, but I wanted to memorialize it somehow in something that was a little more of a keepsake than just a newspaper. So that's what I did.
And there's a quote in it actually that struck me, and I'd like to read it as we finish. And it says, "Elvis told a close circle of friends on many occasions, I can count on one hand the true friends I have and who don't need me or use me for anything. And I'm proud to say that Eddie is one of them."
That's right.
So he said that about your father, and I thought that was a beautiful thing to say.
It was, and Dad was proud of that too. He never wanted anything from Elvis. He just wanted his friendship.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Janice, and I really appreciate you giving up over an hour's worth of your time to speak to myself and the fans about Eddie and Elvis.
It's been my pleasure, Steve. I appreciate you reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity to speak to everyone. So thank you.